So we'll open the floor to questions. Sasha, I think you have a question, and John next.
I actually do have some questions because I don't understand it, sorry. The first question is to Paula. Why do you put on AC with waste reception? AC have nothing to do with it.
Sorry?
You were mentioning that you prefer bottom-up initiatives, and you were mentioning the AC, the Environmental Shipping Index. I don't understand the link with waste reception because it has nothing to do with waste reception, or maybe I'm wrong. That is my question. And the second question is, I don't understand the signification of indirect fee. What does indirect mean? In my port is the cruise lines are paying to me. I'm the terminal operator. So this is direct. So I truly don't understand. So just to have some clarifications from Anna or for anyone.
Well, the ESI is just an example of a bottom-up system.
Oh, okay. It's nothing to do with it.
It's just to make a comparison. And about the indirect fee, it's considered indirect because it does not depend on the quantity of waste delivered. Just for that.
Yeah, just to clarify that from the point of view of the current directive, because of course what you have in place in German ports to comply with the current directive. The current directive says the cost shall be covered through a fee from ships. In order to provide an incentive for delivery, that fee, a significant part of the cost, shall be an indirect fee. So a part of that fee charged to ships shall be indirect, shall be decoupled from the amount of waste delivered. This has been implementing in many different ways in ports across Europe. Some have administrative waste fees, others have penalty fees, others have 100% indirect. There's a whole, I mean, if we could dedicate a full day discussing different cost recovery systems. In Germany, they have a different system. In Port of Hamburg, they'll probably have something specific again. So we said we need more harmonization across the new ports because we want to make sure there's a level playing field between ports, that more or less the same things are applied in terms of principles, transparency requirements, also the calculation of the significant contribution of the costs. That needs to be the indirect fee. And then the Commission said for garbage, we have to go to 100%. So no matter the type of system you have in place, what you charge to the ship in terms of the fee shall give them a right to deliver all their garbage transport without having to pay additional direct fees, which is the case still in ports today. I hope that explains it better. It's not an easy concept.
No.
Sorry, John. John's question.
Thank you. John Richardson again from FIPRA. Is this working now?
Yeah.
I have two comments, if I may. The first one is that, I mean, we've had the current directive in force for quite some time. We've now had a long process leading to proposals for revision of the directive, and that will hopefully be completed early next year. And yet we've heard from the panel today that there are still a lot of questions open and a lot of doubts about whether we've actually achieved 100% success. And my conclusion on that is just to say, it seems to me that the topic of how we deal with ship-generated waste, what sort of port reception facilities we should have and how they should be organized, is a topic which is likely to remain with us for the foreseeable future as technology changes and as industry practices change. So I hope, Anna, that you're not landed with the next revision of the directive as well, and that somebody else has to do that. Second comment, I'm struck by the constructive nature of the discussion, and I've been struck for quite some years now by the high quality of relationship between the Commission and EXA and ESPO on subjects like this one. And as someone who's worked for 10 years in the maritime sector for the industry and 35 years for the Commission before that, it seems to me that this is a success story, a story of successful collaboration between industry and the Commission, and I'd like to congratulate you all on that. But with a caveat. Quite often in a case like that, if the sector works well with the Commission, somebody stands up and says, well, you see, the Commission is in the pocket of the industry, and it isn't taking citizens' concerns into account. So my question is, have you had any criticism from citizens of port cities, from the environmental organisations like NABU? Is there somebody out there who's saying that you haven't got it right and that you aren't treating the environment correctly? Or is all sweetness and light as it seems to be this afternoon?
Thank you for the congratulatory words. I think in the Commission we also see this as a bit of a success story. I mean, this also shows how quickly the process has gone this year, that we managed to get a General Approaching Council within a number of months, and then also into the Parliament that has sailed generally well. Your first comment on the fact that there seem to be so many issues still on the table is a reflection of where we are currently in the political process. So this is not yet set in stone. We have a proposal, we've got different positions from the different co-legislators who are now going to meet in trilogue meetings in November. So this is a crucial phase, it's the last phase. And so the issues that have come up here, the fee systems, the green ship concept, new waste streams, those are the ones that are going to be discussed in November between the co-legislators. The Commission will be sitting there a bit in an advisory role, I have to say, and then we will see what comes out of this process, and that's what's going to be adopted next year. And that's the directive that the Commission will then has to oversee the implementation. So hopefully it will be a clear text, because the clearer and more transparent it is, easier to implement. But indeed, then we start a new process, which is the implementation phase, the transposition phase in the United States. We have this expert group that I mentioned in my presentation, which hopefully will facilitate our work, because the ESF subgroup that we had, this was a subgroup under the European Sustainable Shipping Forum, was also a big success. I mean, we had a very constructive cooperation. I'm looking at ESPO here, with ESPO, EXA, they've all participated, the NGOs as well. I think we had a very close and good collaboration also with the NGOs. You may know that in the Parliament, the ENVI committee, that's the Environment Committee, had shared confidence over the proposal. They've issued a very interesting opinion, and that also feeds into the process. So, also defending environmental ambitions, I have to say, Commission is really fighting hard to keep environmental ambition up. That is why we are lobbying, or we are really defending our ideas on the 100% indirect fee for garbage. I think that's really one of the key measures to address this topic efficiently. With reservations from the boards, and these will be discussed in the upcoming trilogues. So, yeah, we are in the middle of this political process, and we need a bit more patience to see what is going to be the end result. And probably next time that we meet in the next Greenport conference, I will be able to present the new directive, and we know what will be in concrete terms.
If there's no more questions, I'd just like to make a couple of comments, if I may. John, I too would like to commend the Commission. As a former seafarer, where the ocean was your dumping ground, up to 20 years ago, the disposal of waste at sea was criminal. And I think the move since then has been seismic. I genuinely mean that. We must never forget that, and I commend my colleagues here in relation to that. However, we must never forget that our politicians are elected, and I empathise with your struggles at times. I do think that programs like David Attenborough's Blue Planet have had a major impact on the politicians through their constituents, and I think that top-down pressure. When you see the programs, you see the plastic and the, dissecting birds and pulling plastic and so on and so on. It has a hugely effect, I think, on particularly on the political system, and I think that should have, personally, I think that should be the situation. On other positive notes, I welcome the inclusion of scrubber waste. It is a major situation. I never believed that dilution is a solution, because no matter how many times you dilute it, it's still there. And that seems to be the situation with wet open loop scrubber systems. And there have been issues with that. And the legislation around that needs to be tightened up. I think it's certainly the scrubber waste. It's something that I'm working on a former project. Again, it's an Atlantic, and I signed up with the agreement of the Council of Cruise Europe that they would become observers, if you like, to an EU project called Atlantic Blue Ports. I'm looking at ballast water exchange, I'm looking at hydrocarbon waste, but in particular I'm looking at scrubber waste because it's one of the biggest issues hitting all our ports, particularly in Northern Europe, with ICA, and it's going to be even more important, I think, from 2020 when we go to 0.5%, because cruise lines and all shipping will still want to burn HFO with a scrubber system, and that waste has to be treated properly or it's got to be put ashore rather than diluted and put into the water column. The third thing that I would like to talk about is a very innovative system that's being developed at the moment, again throughout the industry, container cruise line. It's been developed by a company called Ocean Guardian. And in summary, what Ocean Guardian, and I had a meeting last week in Florida with the owners, and they're rolling this out. I think it's probably one of the best solutions to compliance. And I do use the word compliance because basically what it is that this company are gathering the information from IMO, from European legislation, from world legislation, right down to national legislation or even local legislation. It's gathering it all into a system, and a ship fitted with Ocean Guardian has an alert system so that if a container ship is coming from China to Europe, whatever waters it passes through, Ocean Guardian will alert that line if they have the system on board. You are now entering such an area, you cannot do this, you must have your ballast water exchange, you have to be in compliance with the NICA directive or whatever. And I think that in itself will help compliance. It will help the shipping companies and the ship operators in their compliance with international regulations. I think that's very innovative and it's being rolled out particularly around Europe. So I think the other thing I would just I suppose to assist Paula in her people forget that, and I'm speaking personally here, people forget that a port is a vehicle. It's an interface between shipping and the community, or the shipping between the ship and a facility. So to say that the port will be prosecuted or the port will be fined, you know, many ports are private enterprises, and unless there's legislation there, I mean, for a port to give a rebate of 5, 10, 15, 20% on handling waste and then to have to pay for the handling of that waste, it's not going to happen. You know, I've run ports, and you know, we operate on a cost neutral basis. You know, we love to incentivize. We will work very closely with the ship, wishing to get the waste ashore, etc. So, but it's that there's a missing link there that somebody has to pay, and I don't go along with the cruise lines when they say waste has a value. Fine, it may have a value to somebody. If the value is there, give it back to the cruise line, having gone through the system. But you know, the port is a vehicle. A lot of ports are privately owned ports, and they operate in a private capacity. So that has to be taken into account as well. So they're just some of the comments I think on this session. So if anybody wants to agree or disagree or whatever, yeah, please feel free. Okay, moving swiftly on. We're bang on time. We've just if you don't mind bearing with me for a few minutes, while we just do a quick recap on the day and what we had. Again, we had the first session this morning on port-city relationships. Again, please log into the ESPO website and see the publication that took 2 years to develop on port-city and a lot of the issues that we're discussing in relation to relationships and bottlenecks, etc. It was all done there. I am looking forward to the development of the possibility of a second pan-European dialogue. I think there was talk of that in Nantes, so I think that would be very welcome by everybody. Session number 2, I certainly learned an awful lot of that from Guillermo, Juan and David in relation to shore power, LNG. It does, and I mean the handling of LNG, we had to chat, Guillermo, and there's this concept of, you know, but we're all handling LPG or LNG for the last number of years. I think there's a fear factor there that needs to be, if we've gone through. Shore power, a very interesting presentation on, and again, the question from Valerie in relation to shore power versus LNG and cold ironing. That's a debate I think that's going to go on as well. And then this afternoon, obviously, on port reception facilities. So and waste. And again, it was one of the major bugbears, I think, of David Dingle for many years, was that the inadequacy of PRF in the Baltic, particularly for the cruise lines. I know from our members of Cruise Europe that that has been addressed by and large. Again, there's issues in relation to grey water, black water. These are all issues that are coming down the track for all of us. And I think the issue, one of the main issues there, there's two issues. Number one, and I think our three speakers, that if you take waste that has been segregated on a ship and it goes ashore, it's up to all of us to ensure that that's handled in a way that is the same as it's handled on the ship. In other words, it's treated in the segregated manner that it goes ashore rather than being lumped into a thing. I think national legislation probably is a hindrance when it comes to the reception of black water and grey water ashore. I know in Ireland, for example, if a ship comes alongside and I want to pump black water into the municipality, they probably won't allow it because the ship has to provide certification of what it is, etc., rather than contamination. So I think there's a lot of work to do on that, and I think ports would certainly welcome that. I know the shipping lines would certainly welcome that as well. So there's a lot of work to be done, but again, I certainly wish to commend DG Mara and your colleagues in relation to the work you're doing. So without further ado, thank you very, very much for your attendance. I know it's going to be a busy couple of days. So hereby close the session. Thank you very much.